back with the Better Homes and Gardens new cookbook. I have just picked a very basic yellow cake recipe, the first cake recipe in the cake section of this book, and I need a pen. Okay, so the first measurement they call for is 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour. Well, as I just said, I weigh my cups of flour out at between 4 and 4¼ ounces. So 2.5 cups would be the same as 10¾ ounces of flour. It also calls for 2.5 teaspoons of baking powder. Well, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and mix up the dry ingredients and just show you why it's so much easier to weigh ingredients. Start with a 0, and I said that I needed 10 3/4 ounces of flour. So, again, there's no spooning, there's no sleeping, there's just some scooping and some weighing. It's delightful. Okay, so there we have it. 10 3/4 ounces. Calls for 2.5 teaspoons of baking powder. Okay, so 2.5 teaspoons. What I'm going to do before I do anything else is zero this out. I know that 2.5 teaspoons is not going to weigh very much ounce-wise, so I'm going to switch to grams. It's okay to do that if you have one of these scales. Just remember. So that's why I have my little notepad so I can write it down. The 1 teaspoon actually turned out to be 4 grams, so I know 2 teaspoons is 8 grams, and the half a teaspoon is going to be 2 grams, so 10 grams of baking powder. Half a teaspoon of salt. I generally like to use 1/4 teaspoon per cup, and since I've got a little bit more than 2 cups of flour, I'm probably going to go a little bit heavy on the salt. And that rounded 1/2 teaspoon of salt weighs in at 4 grams. So again, I'll write that down. Speaking of salt, a lot of times I use kosher salt when I'm cooking, but baking I tend to use fine table salt or a fine sea salt. That's a really nice clean salt flavor to put in all of your cooking and your baking. At any rate, the reason I don't often use kosher salt is because the flakes are really big, so sometimes you end up with a little bit of salt flake in your food. And also, kosher salt tends to weigh less per teaspoon volumetrically than does regular old salt. Because the flakes are bigger, there's a lot more space in between them than there are in the very even cubic crystals in regular salt. So if you're going to use salt in baking and you want to weigh it, do make sure that you're using a finer grain salt. Okay, so there's that. Those are my dry ingredients. That's it, 3 ingredients. Generally speaking, if you're making especially a yellow or white cake, your dry ingredients are going to include flour, baking powder and or baking soda, and some salt. At this point, you can add in some dry spices if you want to. A lot of times, you know what, one of my little tricks is add just a few little gratings of fresh nutmeg into a cake batter. It doesn't give a ton of flavor necessarily, but it adds a little background, something where people just say, wow, that's a little bit different. That's really good. The next measurement is 2/3 cup of butter. See, seriously? All right, let me grab some butter. Here's the thing, 2/3 cup of butter, that's just a stupid measurement. And the reason why is because, at least in the United States, butter is cut into 4 4-ounce sticks. And 4 ounces of butter equals half cup. So, 2 sticks of butter would give you an entire cup. Then you have to do math, which is going to give me about 5½ ounces. I'll do the math for real, you know, with a calculator, but I don't have that with me right now. And I don't particularly want to do long division in my cookbook. All right, 1 1/3 cups of sugar. This, of course, will not get measured into the same bowl that had the dry ingredients. I'll make sure, though, that I write down either on my notepad or in the book itself. It's a cookbook, people. It's not a coffee table book. It's not a book where you're supposed to ooh and ah and not ever use it. Its purpose is to teach you to cook or help you to learn to cook and to bake. And it's not going to do you any good if you don't use it. Your cookbook should always be evolving. It should be eventually a reflection of you. When you first start cooking, you might be following recipes, but eventually you're going to decide that maybe this needs a little more time, that you'd like to use chicken stock instead of beef stock for that, and you might say, you know what, rather than using some allspice, maybe I'll just stick with some cinnamon, those sorts of things. Make notes in your cookbooks, and it should be a picture or a movie almost of your journey of learning to cook. But anyway, that is an aside. Back to work. For my creaming ingredients, I just usually weigh them directly into the mixing bowl. It's a very big mixing bowl. It weighs a bit, but my scale can handle up to 5 kilograms, which is a bit over 11 pounds. Generally speaking, that's adequate for the home cook. In goes my 1 3/4 cups of sugar, or whatever I have weighed it out to be. That goes in there. The butter will go in there as well. And then what do I have? I have 1½ teaspoons of vanilla. I never, ever measure or weigh vanilla. I can't think of an instance when I necessarily would. I just add some. You need to know what a teaspoon looks like as you're pouring it. So until you get really good, you might want to use a teaspoon and just watch what it looks like when you're pouring it into the bowl. But honestly, I just go splash, splash, and be done with it. 2 eggs. You don't really have to worry about measuring that. 1 1/4 cups of milk. Here's the thing about weighing liquids. You can do it. You know, Alvin Brown is fond of saying a pint is a pound the world around, which means that 16 ounces of volumetric measure is also 16 ounces by weight. That's only really dead on true if you're talking about water, whole eggs, or whole milk. So 1 1/4 cups of milk would be 8 ounces plus 2 ounces, 10 ounces of milk, which is almost the same weight as the 2½ cups of flour. So again, don't get confused. Don't think that you can just interchange your measurements because it's not going to work. Okay, I think that might be it. So now, the next time I go to make this recipe, I have all of my notes written down either on a sticky in here or just written on the page, and I can go down and weigh out in one container my flour, my baking powder, and my salt, the weight of your butter, the weight of everything you're using. There you have it. Hopefully this has given you some idea about why it's so important to weigh ingredients as opposed to using volumetric measurements. Thank you guys for watching. Again, I'd love some feedback, onlinepastrychef@yahoo.com, and I will see you guys later. Bye.